What's up everyone, today we're gonna assemble and review the Bonebreaker Build-A-Figure. This is a quick overview of all the parts that you will need to build this Bonebreaker. We start off by taking the right side of his tank bottom. Next we take that rear cover and then peg it into that hole on the back of the tank, like so. Next would be the engine part. This one has the air intakes facing forward and you want to slide that into this slot over here at the top on the back of the tank. And after that we reach out for his waist piece that will slot into this round section, much like the turret on a tank. Now we're going to put the two halves of the tank together. Look out for that same peg hole on the back of the other side, making sure that the cover also goes in there. Now as you put the two halves of the tank together, you just want to make sure that this sharp part of the front of the tank doesn't get caught up in one of these tubes. Now compressing the two halves of the tank together and making sure that peg on the cover on the back stays aligned with that hole. The next step is to put on those drums on the back of the tank. There are holes on those drums and you want to see the side of the drums with the nozzle features facing the outside of the tank. The smooth face would actually face on the inside of the tank. So you peg in those drums like so, pegging it on the other side as well. I also want to say that these two drums are exactly the same sculpt, so it doesn't matter which one goes on the left or right, just that those nozzles are facing on the outside of the tank. The second last step, of course, is to peg on his torso onto that tank bottom, and it should pop on rather firmly. And the last step is, of course, to pop on his head sculpt. And now that Bonebreaker is finally fully assembled, we can see that he actually has some accessories, which are his two interchangeable fists, as well as a futuristic looking rifle. The rifle is cast in a gunmetal grey plastic. There's interesting details sculpted all over the rifle, from the scope at the top that's mounted onto the rails. And over here we also see quite an extended magazine. It has quite an angular pistol grip as well, and on the back a skeletal butt. And down the front of the barrel of the rifle, we see that there's also a hit of silver paint, just to show some wear in that rifle. There's similarly nice detail on the other side as well, and that same hit of silver paint on the front of the muzzle. The cool thing about the rifle is that it also has a hole for the muzzle at the front, so you can plug on some flash effects from figures like the Black Widow in her white outfit or Jigsaw. So this rifle looks really cool with that flash effect while firing. And that means you can also use the same smoke effects from those two same action figures to have his rifle smoking after shooting off a couple of rounds. He holds the rifle just fine in either of his trigger hands. So you do have the option of Bonebreaker operating his rifle on either of his right or left hands. Finally, he comes with two fists that are cast in the green plastic that's similar in color with his torso. These fists are articulated inwards as well as outwards. Those two fists pop onto the figure just fine, so you can have him with clenched fists when he's not handling his weapon. And a super cool thing about this figure is that he has that cover on the back of his tank that you can flip open, revealing a small compartment where you can of course store those spare hands when he's not using them securely. And I do believe this is the first time we're seeing such accessory storage on a Marvel Legends figure, so that's really impressive. Taking a closer look at the sculpt of this really impressive Build-A-Figure, and I can say that there are plenty of new parts. The only reused parts of this figure are his torso and his arms, and that's on the body mold that we've seen on figures like the classic Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Magneto, and Cosmic Spider-Man. Zooming into his head sculpt, and he does have quite a maniacal laugh. His hair is a separate plastic piece that's sculpted in an off-white plastic with plenty of texture to show quite a wild mohawk hairstyle. The rest of his head is cast in a flesh tone plastic. Some nice sharp detail like those wrinkles in his forehead, as well as the lines of the side of his face as he laughs. He's got a black pair of shades and these are pegged into the side of his head. That means you can easily rotate this pair of shades up, revealing his painted face. Over here on display once again we have Hasbro's digital dot matrix printing technique, and that means you have really sharp paint applications for his eyebrows, his eyes, as well as his teeth. The red inside his mouth and his tongue is actually a separate piece of plastic that's inserted into this head. So the digital printing technique as well as the insertion of different plastics in the mouth means that you have quite a clean and well executed face sculpt. No bleeding from any of the colors whatsoever. and you also have a really wild expression on his face. So I really think this head sculpt is really quite awesome. Onto his torso as well as his arms, these are mostly bare plastic. Moving on to his torso, it is cast in a green plastic. There's a skin tone paint application over here on the neck, and the coat of paint looks just slightly thin. You can still see a little hint of the green plastic from below, but I think the color of the paint is a close match to the skin tone plastics used on his head sculpt as well as his arms. He's got a harness overlay on his torso, and that's made of a couple of straps that go across his torso and held together in the middle by a ring, and this ring feature is painted in silver metal color. His arms are cast in a flesh tone plastic, accessorized with some wrist gauntlets that are cast in a metallic grey plastic. And on his hands, they are cast in that same green plastic as his torso. Moving on to the tank base, and it's really interesting to look at. Dark grey plastic over here for the main waist piece, and that's accessorized by two silver plastic knobs on the side. There are also two green armor plates down the side, and these are connected to tubes painted in silver that go into his mechanical waist piece. Finally, in the middle of the waist piece is also a hit of red paint. So the mixed use of plastics and paint, as well as cool mechanical detail like rivets and knobs, make this look like a complex life support system for Bonebreaker. On the front of the tank, we also have a couple of cool details like the headlights, which are painted in a light yellow paint. There's also nice texturing on the front of the tank. You have sculpted lines to show where there are supposed to be panels, and also some rough textures to show wear and tear. There's also sculpted scratches and dents, and there's a little bit of silver paint wash on the front to really bring out that worn detail. He also has a mini gun over here. This is sculpted with a couple of holes down the front of the barrel to vent off the heat, and you will notice that there's also a hole on that nozzle. And you can easily plug in some blast effects from figures like Iron Man to have Bonebreaker blasting his minigun. Moving down the side of the tank, we also see even more cool detail. The tracks are in that same dark grey plastic. Really cool sculpting to see those road wheels. Each one of them also have a couple of rivets on them. Even the bottom of the tracks are also sculpted to show some realistic pads. However, these threads do not actually work, and there are no wheels on them to help Bonebreaker roll more smoothly over surfaces. It's also nice that there's also sculpted detail on the bottom of the tank. You can see an access panel over here, probably to do some maintenance work. And there's also a sculpted dent over here, probably from a mine blast. And then we move back to the side of the tank. We also see a door buster over here that's attached to the side of the tank. There's also quite a bit of weathering sculpt, as well as scratches and dents. However, that's not given any silver paint or any wash. So that is quite a pity, because a paint wash would have definitely brought out all those extra details. On the top of the tank, we also see that there are sculpted vents over here, and that's probably for him to cool his systems. There's also anti-slip panels over here, and that's really quite a realistic feature for a tank. His exposed supercharger engine on the back has those air intakes which are huge and stick out at the top. The exposed supercharger engine also has a couple of nicely sculpted segments. You can also see the belt running down the front, and the belt is painted in red. So that's a nice touch of color to break up all that grey on that engine. I also should mention that there are also peg holes on these anti-slip panels, so you can peg in other action figures to have them hitch a ride on the back of his tank. Now we also have a look at these drums. These are cast in a brighter silver plastic, sculpted detail for the nozzles on the sides, and also some hinges over here to show how these tanks open up. There's also sculpted detail to show some battle damage from bullet shots. So these are quite a nice feature, showing that he has actually some gas tanks in order to keep him running and rolling into battle. The left side of the tank is less interesting compared to the right, but it still has those same sculpted panels and battle damage dents sculpted into them. There's some electronics panel sculpted over here, so that's some more detail onto that top of the tank. So overall, this tank base is sculpted really well with plenty of eye-catching detail. This definitely feels like it's breaking new ground for Build-A-Figures in the Marvel Legends series. And having a black wash or some silver dry brushing can definitely make this tank base look much more impressive. For articulation, his neck is on a ball hinge, so you can spin his head 360. There's also some sideways tilt. He can look down quite a fair bit, as well as up. He's got a swivel hinge at the shoulders, so that goes all the way around, as well as coming out pretty far. He's got a bicep swivel, so that goes 360, and double hinged elbows for quite good range. At his wrists of his trigger hands, there's a swivel hinge, so it goes 360, as well as bending down and up. He's got a mid-torso ab crunch, so you can bend him forward quite a good bit, as well as backward, and he gets quite good range. He's got a swivel at his waist, so you can spin him 360. However, that joint is ratcheted and actually feels quite stiff. The ratchets in the waist swivel were just too tight, and the clicks were quite scary loud, so I put some silicone shock oil inside, and now that waist moves much smoother and doesn't have that scary loud clicks. So this could be an option that you could try. And for his last point of articulation, that minigun is attached on a ball joint to his tank base, so you can rotate it upwards as well as sideways, so you can have it shooting in different directions. While there's not much articulation from simply because he doesn't have many human body parts, the mere shelf presence of that tank base is really super impressive and awesome. It's fantastic that you can store his interchangeable hands at the back of his tank, and you can combine him with other effect parts from other Marvel Legends, as well as stand up some other Marvel Legends teammates like Lady Deathstrike on the pegs of the back of the tank. Makes this guy such a super enjoyable build-a-figure. He's not just impressive because he's breaking new ground with all the new parts as a build-a-figure, but also because he's got so many other features that really enhances the playability of the Marvel Legends line. Size-wise, Bonebreaker stands at about 6 inches to the top of his head, and that's about 15 centimeters. To the top of his mohawk, he's just over 6¼ inches, and that's about 16 centimeters. For size comparisons, here he is with Lady Deathstrike. I couldn't find Sculpt Buster, but here's that Reaver head on Deathlock's body, which was reused for Sculpt Buster. With Wolverine and Jubilee, Rogue and Forge, and Cable and Punisher. For comparisons with other lines, here he is with some G.I. Joe Classified series, and some Star Wars Black series. Bonebreaker is quite simply breaking new grounds as a Marvel Legends build-a-figure. The tank base is crazy awesome and sculpted with plenty of detail. This figure is impressive as a standalone and even more playable when you add in effect parts and pose him with his teammates. He could have come with another neutral head sculpt and had some more dry brushing of paint on the tank, but this build-a-figure for me really elevates Marvel Legends as an action figure line. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, and subscribe to my channel for more toy reviews. Thanks for watching, take care and stay safe.